This is the Middle-earth philosopher. Maedhros is one of the most tragic characters of Middle-earth because of the great burdens he has to carry and eventually crush him. We all know him as the eldest son of Fëanor and the de facto leader of the East Noldor faction in Beleriand during the First Age. Someone who rose to power and fell from it in spectacular style. But these burdens also symbolize a contradiction that was in his character, perhaps ironically, parallels Tolkien's most well-known character, Frodo Baggins. On paper, pardon the pun, the two couldn't be the furthest from each other. Never mind the vast distance of time between the two eras that they lived in. Maedhros was born during the glory time of Valinor, before Morgoth was freed from his imprisonment, and to two powerful elves, Fëanor and Nurdinel. More than that, he wasn't just an elf or an elf lord, but an Eldar, a high elf, which to many people and fans automatically elevates him several levels above several other characters and races in Middle-earth. As such, this prince among princes, kings, queens, and Ainur had it good. Frodo Baggins, in contrast, is a hobbit, and that's more or less the gist of it. Few in Middle-earth seem to know anything about them or that they even exist, and those that do know barely pay any attention to them except when some venture out into the world on the affairs of great powers, such as the final years of the fall of Arnor or the Great Plague that killed like half the population of Middle-earth, it seems. And yes, I'm exaggerating. And the Shire, while considered a paradise, if you will, among its small inhabitants, is next to nothing compared to a land that is more ancient and inhabited by aforementioned beings. And in fact, Frodo's only claim to lineage of note is that he's a Baggins, and that while considered a well-off family, is also the nephew of Bilbo Baggins, who was one of those few hobbits I mentioned before that dared to venture out of the Shire on a long and distant journey with some dwarves, and came back changed. Changed enough that he's still alive after many, many decades, which I guess to hobbits seems unnatural to them. The similarities kick in here though. Maedhros is caught up in extraordinary circumstance where the peace of Valinor is shattered by Morgoth, via his theft of the Silmarils and the murder of his grandfather Finwë. His father, who had already been somewhat of a disturbance of the peace beforehand, and had left Maedhros' mother and took him and his brothers away, now moves the Noldor people to war at all and any cost, enacting an oath with his family that will haunt Maedhros for the rest of his life. Likewise, Frodo is also caught up in extraordinary circumstances by actions of his family over some jewel. That being, as we all know, the revelation that the minuscule magic trinket that he picked up in a cave a long time ago is actually the ruling One Ring of Sauron, and that it has now become proactive in trying to find its original owner so it can help him finish conquering the world and such. While Maedhros' journey begins already cursed with the Alcalon incident happening not long after Fëanor's declaration of war and departure from Valinor, Frodo is just trying to leave the Shire to get the Rivendell to drop the damn thing off to people who know better what to do with it. Both choices result in a journey of an adventure, conflict, and very relationships that lead ultimately both people to the end of their respective ages. In fact, it's in the end of their journeys that the parallels become strongest. That is, that by the end of their roads, both characters feel like the jewels that are assigned to their charge have become a curse. Maedhros is in more an extroverted sense, in that he goes from being a high king of his people for a short time to a proud prince ruling his own great realm and part of a great alliance during wartime, to falling into disgrace at the defeat of said alliance and becoming a refugee for the most part, being a prince in name only, which by itself is ironic given that this is exactly what he accuses King Thingol of being when he first arrived in Beleriand, and further continuing to choose violence against his own kind, if reluctantly, for the sake of the Silmarils and the oath of his father. All of which results in failure until the very end, when after the War of Wrath, when the war is in the midst of a cataclysmic change and the great enemy is defeated, that in one last desperate attempt, He and his last surviving brother, Maedhros, sneak into the elven camp, sneak like criminals, not stride in like proud princes, mind you, and kill more elves to finally regain the Silmarils. By the mysterious grace of the Maiar General Yonway, they are allowed to leave with them, and, having finally achieved the quest began so long ago, seems like Maedhros will at last get some sense of peace that he's longed for. But it's not to be, as the family heirloom rejects him. Now, it's worth mentioning here briefly that Maedhros isn't given enough credit here, if tragically, in that, despite being the eldest of Fëanor's sons, he was also probably the most disliked because of how progressive he was. Maedhros recognized early on how wrong his father was and openly distanced himself from them upon that revelation, even if he was still obedient to him in the end. And that he tries the hardest out of all the Noldor to maintain the peace between them for the sake of getting the jewels back and killing Morgoth. All this, and despite the curse of Mandos, family ridicule, and all of it, is the one ultimately to finally achieve what the Noldor came to Middle-earth for in the first place. Now, that said, the rejection at the end of the road, where he expected to finally find peace, but didn't, finally breaks him, and he kills himself by falling into a fire chasm, along with one of the very jewels that he sacrificed everything for in vain. Likewise, at the end of Frodo's journey, while not experiencing any political drama or international conflicts directly, like the Elf Lord, has gone through some deep shit. Being betrayed by someone he trusted, twice, been on the run and hunted like an animal all across Middle-earth by orcs, monsters, demons, and men, all the while being mentally tormented by the One Ring, which is actively trying to twist him into something corrupt. He finally arrives at the goal post that he's trying to get to, Mount Doom, to destroy the damn thing and go back to his life that he once had, where he didn't know of such tribulation. And it's at the final goal post, before a fire chasm, that he fails. The jewel that had been the object of his mission breaks him at last. And I have to say, I really appreciate Return of the King's portrayal of this in the movies, because it shows that Frodo has fallen into such despair at this point, because even after the ring's destruction, he knows he's fucked up, because it wasn't even by his own actions that the success was brought. Depending on your point of view, it was fate or random fucking chance. Everything had been for nothing, and Frodo is now just tired and now wants just to give up and die. Now, these are pretty strong parallels given the vast differences between the two, and honestly, I don't know if that was intentional or if that was just how the author thought things through. But regardless, it involves characters who were decent people becoming twisted people through circumstances, yet still giving it their all, only to drop the ball at the literal last second in front of fire. Ugh. But it's also here where the two diverge. Maedhros had no one to save him at the end. No one to substitute his life for to rid himself of the fucking object that had the nerve to reject everything he had sacrificed for it. And so he actually dies, and dies alone. In fact, I think here, his parallel to Frodo is then replaced by a parallel to Gollum. Yet another character sharing some traits that he is also bound to a jewel that is destroying him and throws himself into a fire just to keep it. Frodo, however, had Sam. And while the question of fate is very much apparent here, if you read Tolkien's letters, if you were in that moment though in the story with just Frodo, Sam, and Gollum in the ring, you have no clue of such larger mysteries. There's just you guys there, fighting it out, trying to decide what the hell to do. Sam reached out to Frodo to encourage him not to give up when he wanted to, because he felt like he had no strength left, and like I said earlier, that he had failed in his mission. But Sam was encouraging that last vestige of hope that Frodo still somehow had. I wonder if Maedhros had such a person if he had died the way he did. Had someone been there to tell him, just let the Silmaril go, you're not bound to it anymore, get rid of it, it's brought you nothing but evil and fucked up your life. That if someone had said that to him, Would he have just done the same thing that Maedhros did, tossed it, albeit in despair, and live out the rest of his life? Honestly, I don't think so, when I come to think of it now. Because of the immense burdens of the responsibilities he's had centuries to bear, and the responsibilities of the evil choices that he's taken, even though he didn't want to make them. Even if Maedhros had chucked the Silmaril, the shame and despair would have remained with him. And for mortals, that's a whole nother levels of personal hell that mortals don't have to deal with. So no, Samwise Gamgee to urge him on. Is it any wonder that, like Gollum, that he chooses to kill himself with the very jewel that tormented him for so many centuries? Even for Frodo, his own experience and shame, if you will, eventually becomes too much to handle, and he, along with his uncle, have to leave Middle-earth to finally get back the peace that they longed for so long, free from the corrupted influence in themselves that was produced by the ring and the burden that it had cursed them with. It's also fair to note here that YouTuber Girl Next Gondor makes a comparison as well, that both also had the chance of repentance, or rather last chance of repentance. That being that there was a point where either one of them could have, or at least Maedhros, could have turned back from their evil ways, but ultimately did not. Now, having said all that, again, I don't know if these parallels between Frodo and Maedhros and at the end Gollum was intentional, or if that's just how Tolkien thought. But what do you guys think? Do you think that it was intentional? Do you think that it was just chance that the characters have so many similarities and choices? Do you feel any pity for Maedhros given the evil acts that he was a part of? And do you think that Frodo could have stayed in Middle-earth despite the wounds that he suffered from his journey and adventure? And would you have taken up that journey if you had the choices to make like these characters did? Let me know in the comments below. And this is the Miller Philosopher. You guys have a good day.